In the gilded world of New York's elite, some secrets are buried deeper than bank vaults. Catherine Sterling believed her life was an open book, a loving, if ambitious husband, a beautiful home, and a quiet passion for architectural history. But when the woman sleeping with her husband shows up on her doorstep, not with an apology, but with a demand for the keys to her mansion, Catherine's world doesn't just crumble, it detonates. Little did they know, the unassuming wife they tried to discard was not a pawn in their game. She was the one who owned the entire board, holding a secret so monumental it could swallow them whole. The evening light, the color of aged honey, slanted through the tall arched windows of the Greenwich residence, casting long shadows across the polished oak floors. Catherine Sterling traced the rim of her wine glass, the crystal cool against her fingertips. From the outside, her life was a masterpiece of curated perfection. The house, a sprawling neo-Georgian affair she'd meticulously helped restore, was a testament to taste. Her husband, Richard Sterling, a charismatic and ruthlessly ambitious real estate developer, was a testament to success. Their social calendar was a constellation of galas, fundraisers, and exclusive dinners where names were dropped like anchors and fortunes were measured in generations. Tonight was no different. Richard was late, as he often was. Closing a deal. His text had read the words brisk and impersonal. Catherine had long ago stopped questioning the nature of these late-night closings. To question was to invite a cool, dismissive wave of his hand, a condescending smile that made her feel small provincial. She, with her quiet love for historical preservation and her preference for a book over a ballroom, was a quaint accessory to his life. A wife with a good, respectable family name, but to no real power, which was, she suspected, exactly how he liked it. She wandered into the grand library, her sanctuary. The walls were lined with books, not for show but for love. Her fingers brushed against the leather spines of first editions, the scent of old paper and ink, a comforting balm. It was here she did her work, consulting for historical societies, drafting preservation proposals, a small, fulfilling career that Richard benignly referred to as her hobby. Her phone buzzed again, this time, a notification from their joint credit card. She glanced at it, a familiar knot tightening in her stomach. A charge from Le Bijou, a notoriously exclusive jeweler on Madison Avenue. $28,000. It wasn't a birthday, not an anniversary. Richard rarely bought her jewelry anymore. He claimed her classic understated style was impossible to shop for. This was different. This was loud. This was for someone else. The knot in her stomach unfurled into a cold, creeping dread. It wasn't the first sign, merely the most blatant. There were the hushed phone calls he'd take on the terrace, the faint scent of a perfume that wasn't hers, clinging to his suit jackets. Something floral and aggressively expensive, like Chanel No. 5's crueler, more ambitious sister. There were the trips to check on the Aspen property that never appeared on his public itinerary. Catherine was not a fool, but she was an expert at self-deception, a skill honed over a decade of loving a man who saw her as a beautiful piece of furniture. She had built her life around him, sanding down her own edges to fit into the smooth, polished contours of his world. Her own family, the Blackwoods, were a distant memory, a source of quiet pain. Her father, Reginald Blackwood, a man who moved markets with a single phone call, had all but disowned her for marrying Richard. He's a shallow vessel, Catherine. He'd warned her, his voice, cold as a banker's heart. He sees your name, not you. At the time, she had called it love. Now, in the silent, opulent library, she called it a cage. A particular property had become Richard's obsession of late Greyhaven. Perched on a cliff overlooking the Long Island Sound, It was a magnificent, Gilded-Age stone manor that had sat empty for years, tied up in the impenetrable legal knots of an eccentric reclusive owner. It was the crown jewel of the Gold Coast, and Richard wanted it more than anything. The history, the prestige. Owning Greyhaven isn't just buying a house, it's buying a legacy. He'd said just last week, pacing the length of their living room, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. Whoever gets their hands on it will be king. He'd spent a fortune on lawyers trying to find a way in a loophole, a weakness in the ownership structure. He spoke of it as if it were his destiny, the final, unassailable symbol of his arrival. Catherine had listened a silent spectator to his ambition, never once mentioning that she had spent her childhood summers within its cold stone walls. Never once mentioning that Greyhaven was her ancestral home, the seat of the Blackwood family for over a century. It was a secret she kept locked away, a relic from a life she had been forced to leave behind. To Richard, she was Catherine Sterling née Prescott, having taken her mother's maiden name after the falling out with her father. The formidable Blackwood name, and all it represented, remained dormant. The purr of a car engine in the driveway finally announced his arrival. Catherine took a deep, steadying breath, schooling her features into a mask of serene composure. She would not confront him tonight. Not about the jewelry, not about the perfume. Confrontation required strength she wasn't sure she possessed. Richard entered, shrugging off his custom Tom Ford coat. He looked energized, triumphant. "You won't believe the day I've had." He began striding to the bar cart and pouring himself a generous measure of Macallan 25. He didn't kiss her or ask about her day. Something good, I hope, she asked, her voice even. "Good, Catherine, it's monumental." He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "I found a way in. A contact, a whisper of a lead on Greyhaven. The old man who owns it is on his last legs, apparently. His estate is a mess. It's the opportunity of a lifetime." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and his gaze was appraising, as if measuring her reaction. "This is it. This is what we've been working towards. Imagine us there. The parties we'll throw, the sheer power of that address." With a word hung in the air, a hollow echo. She saw his vision clearly, him the lord of the manor, and a new lady on his arm. Someone more fitting, perhaps. Someone who wore 28 Tajuzusalla's necklaces without a second thought. The cold dread from earlier solidified into a certainty as hard and sharp as a diamond. The deal he was closing wasn't just for a house, it was for a new life. And she was the one loose end he had yet to tie up. The confrontation Catherine had been avoiding arrived on her doorstep 3 days later, not with a bang, but with the imperious chime of the doorbell. It was a crisp Tuesday morning. Richard had left early, claiming an urgent meeting with his financiers. Catherine was in the garden, tending to her heirloom roses, the simple, tangible act, a small rebellion against the artifice of her life. When she opened the door, she found a woman who seemed to have been sculpted from ambition and silicone. She was tall and slender, poured into a crimson dress that was both outrageously expensive and shockingly inappropriate for a weekday morning. Her blonde hair was a marvel of engineering, her makeup flawless, and around her neck, catching the morning sun with a blinding flash, was the diamond necklace from Le Bijou. Victoria Vance, the woman announced, her voice as sharp and clipped as her manicure. She didn't offer a hand, instead letting her eyes sweep over Catherine's simple linen dress and soil-smudged hands with thinly veiled contempt. "I'm here to see Richard." "He's not here," Catherine said, her own voice, a quiet surprise. It was steady, devoid of the tremor she felt in her core. She made no move to let the woman in. Victoria let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, I know. He's at his lawyer's office, finalizing the paperwork. He sent me ahead. Do you know? Get the lay of the land." She made a grand gesture towards the foyer, as if she were already its mistress. He's so thoughtful. The audacity of it was breathtaking. This was Victoria. The name clicked into place from a whispered snippet of a phone call Catherine had overheard weeks ago. This was the Chanel No. 5, the Aspen trips. The reason Richard's eyes slid past her, as if she were made of glass. The lay of the land, Catherine repeated the words tasting like ash. "Don't play coy, darling, it's dreadfully boring." Victoria sighed, pushing past Catherine into the foyer. She ran a gloved hand over the Biedermeier console table. "It's a lovely house. A bit dated, of course. Too much dark wood. I'm thinking we'll paint everything white. A complete gut job, really." Richard agrees. A fresh start. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to wound to establish dominance. Victoria was a predator marking her new territory, and Catherine was the creature being driven out. The front door opened again, and this time it was Richard. He stopped short, a flicker of something annoyance, surprise, crossing his features before being replaced by a mask of weary resignation. He wasn't expecting Victoria to be so brazen so soon. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" he asked, his tone attempting authority, but failing. "You told me to come, Ricky," she cooed, gliding over to him and placing a possessive hand on his chest. "To start planning. I was just telling her." She flicked her eyes towards Catherine about our plans for a fresh start. Richard finally looked at his wife. There was no apology in his eyes. No shame. Only impatience. The charade was over, and he was clearly relieved. "Catherine, we need to talk," he said, adopting the tone one might use with a difficult child. "This isn't how I wanted this to happen, but it's for the best. Victoria and I, we're together. We have been for some time," Icy Catherine said. The two words were all she could manage. Her mind was a whirlwind of betrayal and a strange, chilling clarity. This was real. This was happening. I'm filing for divorce. Richard continued gaining momentum now that the worst was out. "I've been more than generous. I'm prepared to offer you a very fair settlement. Enough to get you a nice little apartment somewhere. The Hamptons, maybe. You always liked it there." "He's giving you the beach cottage," Victoria added, as if this were a great act of charity. "Of course, this house," she gestured around the grand foyer again, "will be ours." Catherine stared at them, this monstrously confident pair who had already divided up her life, her home, her future, without consulting her. They saw her as a temporary inconvenience, a line item in their new budget. This house, Catherine finally found her voice, a thread of steel weaving through the shock. "This house is in my name, Richard. The deed is solely in my name." It was true. When they'd bought it, her father, in a rare moment of paternal concern, before the final estrangement had insisted, he had provided the down payment with the unshakable stipulation that the deed be held by Catherine alone. A firewall, he'd called it. Richard actually laughed, a short, condescending bark. "Oh, Catherine, darling, don't be naive. That won't stand up for a second. We've been married for 10 years. It's a marital asset. My lawyers will have that sorted by lunch. I paid the mortgage, I paid for the renovations. Every receipt, every check has my name on it. The house is mine. You were just holding it for me." Victoria smirked, a triumphant, venomous little smile. "He's right. You have no idea how these things work, do you? You've been living in his world on his money. The party's over. It's time for you to go. In fact, why don't you start packing? I'd like to have my decorators in by Monday. The sheer unadulterated cruelty of it finally broke through Catherine's shock, replacing it with a slow, burning rage. They weren't just ending a marriage. They were trying to erase her, to render her homeless and penniless a footnote in the story of their grand romance. They had fundamentally miscalculated. They had mistaken her quietness for weakness, her gentleness for stupidity. They had no idea who she was. "Get out," Catherine said, her voice low and dangerous. "I don't think so." Victoria shot back, crossing her arms. "This is my house now, or it will be in a few hours. You are the one who is trespassing." "Catherine, be reasonable," Richard said, stepping forward. "Don't make this ugly. Just pack a bag. We'll have the rest of your things sent to you." "Don't force my hand." He reached out to touch her arm, a gesture of false sympathy that was meant to pacify and dismiss. Catherine flinched back as if from a hot iron. "Your hand," she said, the rage now a glacial calm. "You have no idea, Richard. You have no idea what you've just done." She turned and walked not to her bedroom to pack, but back to the library, her sanctuary, her command center. She closed the heavy oak doors behind her, the solid click echoing the final, irrevocable closing of a chapter in her life. She left them standing in the foyer, two smug conquerors in a castle they believed was already theirs. But the war had just begun, and they had brought a knife to a nuclear fight. The 2 days that followed were a blur of hollowed-out hours and suffocating silence. Catherine moved into the guest suite of her friend Naomi's Upper East Side apartment, a sterile, minimalist space that felt like an alien planet after the warmth and history of her own home. She had left with a single suitcase, refusing to give Richard and Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her scurry to pack up her life under their gloating eyes. Her phone was a relentless barrage of texts and calls from Richard, first cajoling, then demanding, and finally threatening legal action. She ignored them all, placing her phone on silent and letting the battery die. Naomi was a godsend, a fierce and loyal friend who plied her with tea, outrage, and practical advice. "You need a shark, Kath. The best divorce attorney in the city. We'll bleed him dry," she insisted, pacing her sun-drenched living room. But Catherine felt paralyzed adrift in a sea of shock. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the chilling realization of how completely Richard had devalued her, how he had seen their entire marriage as a transaction he was now closing out at a profit. He truly believed he held all the cards. The house, the money, the power, it was all his in his mind. And he was right to a point. While the Greenwich house was in her name, he had funded their lifestyle. A court battle would be brutal, a war of financial attrition she was ill-equipped to fight. On the third morning, a courier arrived. He wasn't from Richard's law firm as she'd expected, but from a name she hadn't seen in over a decade, Blackwood Finch and Associates. The envelope was heavy made of thick, creamy cardstock, with the august, imposing name embossed in stark black lettering. Her breath caught in her throat. Blackwood Finch and Associates was her father's law firm, the firm that had handled his corporate takeovers, his trusts, his entire empire. With trembling hands, she broke the wax seal. The letter inside was brief and formal. "Dear Ms. Sterling Prescott, this letter serves as a formal summons to our offices at your earliest possible convenience to discuss a matter of utmost urgency and importance pertaining to the estate of our client, Mr. Reginald Blackwood. It is imperative that you attend in person. Sincerely, Bartholomew Finch, Senior Partner, Reginald Blackwood, her father." The letter was cold, impersonal, referring to him simply as our client. An estate. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. She hadn't spoken to her father in 5 years, not since a disastrous Christmas encounter where he had referred to Richard as her temporary amusement. Their relationship had been a long, slow erosion, starting with her choice of husband and ending in a chasm of stubborn pride on both sides. She knew he had been unwell. Rumors of a failing heart had trickled through the grapevine of the city's elite, but she had never imagined this. "What is it?" Naomi asked, seeing the color drain from Catherine's face. Catherine handed her the letter. Naomi read it, her eyes widening. "Oh, honey, your dad." A complex cocktail of emotions churned within Catherine, a distant phantom grief for the father she once knew, guilt over their years of silence, and a sudden sharp anxiety. Why was she being summoned now? Had he written her out of his will completely, a final posthumous act of disapproval? Or was it something worse, a final debt she was expected to pay? The timing felt like a cruel joke from the universe, just as her husband was trying to financially obliterate her. Her estranged billionaire father's estate came calling. "I have to go," Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. "Of course you do. I'll come with you," Naomi offered instantly. Catherine shook her head. "No. This is something I have to do alone." This was about the Blackwoods, a world of power and pain she had tried to escape by becoming a Sterling. A world that was now pulling her back. The offices of Blackwood, Finch and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, a world of hushed carpets, gleaming marble and air that smelled of old money and influence. She gave her name, Catherine Prescott, at the front desk. Using Sterling felt like a betrayal of herself now. The receptionist's polite smile didn't flicker, but Catherine saw a spark of recognition in her eyes. The prodigal daughter had returned. She was led not to a standard meeting room, but to a vast corner office. A wall of glass offered a godlike view of the city below. The man who rose to greet her was exactly as she remembered him from her childhood, Bartholomew Finch. He was ageless, with a mane of silver hair, a severe black suit, and eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. He had been her father's right hand, his confidant, his executor in all things. "Catherine," he said, his voice a dry rustle of old documents. "Thank you for coming so promptly. Please sit." He didn't offer condolences. Mr. Finch was not a man for sentimentalities. Business first, always. "I received your letter," she said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It mentioned my father's estate." "Indeed." "Muster." Finch steepled his fingers, his gaze direct and unnervingly perceptive. "Reginald passed away peacefully in his sleep 4 days ago at his home in Geneva. The news has been kept private at his specific instruction until certain preliminary matters could be attended to. 4 days ago, the day before Victoria had arrived on her doorstep. The cosmic irony was so thick she could barely breathe. I'm sorry to hear that," she managed the words, feeling inadequate. He was a complicated man, Finch said, the closest he would ever come to an emotional observation. He was also meticulous. His final will and testament are exceptionally clear and detailed, which brings us to the reason you are here. He slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the vast mahogany desk. "We were in the process of contacting you when our private investigators, who have been keeping a discreet, watchful eye on your welfare at Reginald's behest for the last 10 years, alerted us to your recent change in domestic circumstances." Catherine froze. A watchful eye, her father had been having her followed. The indignation was immediately replaced by a strange, poignant warmth. He hadn't cut her off. He had been watching over her from a distance all this time. He was aware of Richard's activities, Finch said, his tone laced with distaste. Reginald's disapproval of the man was, it appears, well-founded. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Catherine, your father was a proud man. Too proud. He deeply regretted the schism between you. He articulated this to me on many occasions. He respected your desire to build a life on your own terms, even if he disagreed with the cornerstone you chose for it. His final arrangements are a reflection of that regret and of his undiminished love for you. Mr. Finch opened the portfolio. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Reginald's will names a single sole beneficiary for the entirety of his global estate. He looked at her, his stern expression softening for the first time. Everything, Catherine. Blackwood Industries, the international property portfolio, the trusts, the art collection, the liquid assets. It all goes to you. You are, as of this moment, one of the wealthiest women in the world. The room seemed to tilt. The sounds of the city outside faded to a dull roar. Wealthiest women in the world. The phrase was so absurd, so disconnected from the woman who had been wondering how she would afford a lawyer just that morning, that she almost laughed. But I thought he was angry, Finch finished for her. But you were his only child, his legacy. He never wavered on that. The will is ironclad. He then pulled out a single separate document. It was a property deed, crisp and official, and this pertains to a matter of more immediate concern. Reginald reacquired this property through a proxy company 6 years ago. He was waiting for the right moment. The deed was officially transferred into your name, and your name alone, this morning. A small welcome home gift, you might say. He turned the document around for her to read. At the top, in elegant, archaic script, were the words, Deed of Ownership. Property Greyhaven Manor, Long Island, New York. Greyhaven. The house Richard was obsessed with. The symbol of the power he craved. The legacy he was trying to buy. It was hers. It had been hers all along. A slow smile spread across Catherine's face. It wasn't a smile of glee or avarice. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated power. The game had just changed. The board had been flipped, and she was no longer a pawn. She was the queen. Word of Reginald Blackwood's death broke the next morning, not as a quiet obituary, but as a thunderclap across the financial world. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Forbes, they all ran front-page stories on the passing of the titan, the corporate raider, the reclusive billionaire. Speculation about the future of his empire, Blackwood Industries, was rampant. Who would inherit, the articles named a few distant cousins, a charitable foundation, but everyone agreed the succession was a mystery. No one mentioned a daughter. Reginald had guarded his private life so fiercely that Catherine's existence was little more than a forgotten rumor. Richard, of course, would have seen the news. Catherine could picture him in his downtown office, reading the headlines, a flicker of opportunistic greed in his eyes. He would see it not as a tragedy, but as a tectonic shift in the landscape of power and money, a new opportunity to exploit. He would have no idea that the earthquake's epicenter was about to be in his own living room. Mr. Finch had scheduled the formal reading of the will for that afternoon. It was a formality, as he'd already explained everything to Catherine, but it was a necessary legal step. Just you and me, he'd assured her. But when Catherine arrived back at the hallowed offices of Blackwood, Finch and Associates, dressed not in her usual subdued linens, but in a sharp, dark grey Armani suit she had purchased that morning, she found they were not alone. Richard and Victoria were there. They were seated in the reception area, looking absurdly out of place. Richard, in his immaculate Xenia suit, was tense, his jaw tight. Victoria was fidgeting with the strap of her Hermes Birkin bag, her eyes darting around the room, a mixture of avarice and impatience on her face. She looked like a vulture who had heard a distant dinner bell. When they saw Catherine, their expressions morphed from surprise to outright contempt. "What are you doing here?" Richard demanded, standing up. "Following me, trying to cause a scene?" "Funny," Catherine replied, her voice cool and even. "I was about to ask you the same question." "Don't be ridiculous," Victoria scoffed, rising to stand beside Richard, a united front of delusion. Richard heard about a potential claim he might have. A business dealing with Blackwood years ago. A handshake deal that was never honored. With the old man gone, he's just here to see if he's entitled to what's owed. It was a lie, and a laughably transparent one. They were ambulance chasers of the highest order, hoping to find a forgotten crumb falling from the billionaire's table. The idea that Richard, a mid-level developer, had a handshake deal with a financial leviathan like Reginald Blackwood was ludicrous. Before Catherine could respond, Mr. Finch's office door opened. His severe gaze fell upon the uninvited guests. Mr. Sterling. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice dripping with ice. "You are not on the appointment list. My client, Mr. Richard Sterling, believes he may be a creditor to the estate," a new voice said. A slick, oily-looking man in a suit that was just a little too shiny stepped forward. Richard's lawyer. Mr. Finch gave a sigh that was pure theatre, a weary exhalation that suggested he had seen this kind of petty avarice 1,000 times. "Very well. Since the sole beneficiary is present, perhaps we can expedite your inquiry. Please come in." He ushered them all into his office, directing Catherine to the plush leather chair opposite his desk, the seat of power. Richard, Victoria, and their lawyer were relegated to smaller, less comfortable chairs off to the side, like petitioners in a royal court. The power dynamic was unmistakable. Richard watched this arrangement with a frown, a seed of unease clearly planting itself in his mind. Now Mr. Finch began seating himself and placing the will on the desk between himself and Catherine. "You claim to be a creditor, Mr. Sterling. On what grounds? A development project." "The Hudson Yards." Richard began launching into a prepared speech. Reginald Blackwood expressed significant verbal interest in becoming a silent partner. Finch held up a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Mr. Sterling, I have here a complete record of every financial and business dealing Mr. Blackwood has conducted for the past 40 years. Your name appears nowhere, not once. There was no deal. You are wasting my time." Richard's face flushed a dull red. "Now see here." "No, you see," Finch said, his voice turning to granite. "You are here under false pretenses. You are here because you smelled money. But you seem to be under a grave misapprehension about your position in this matter." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "The reading of the will is a private matter for the beneficiary only." Victoria, ever the aggressor, couldn't help herself. "Then why is she here?" She sneered, jabbing a finger toward Catherine. "Is she expecting a handout? Did her rich daddy finally decide to leave her? His pocket change?" Richard smirked. "Don't tell me he left you the china." "Is that it, Catherine? You get the family silverware." They were laughing, the two of them, a cruel, mocking duet. They were so utterly convinced of Catherine's powerlessness, of her insignificance, that they couldn't see the cliff edge they were gleefully dancing on. Catherine looked at Mr. Finch. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. She let their laughter die down, savoring the moment. Then she spoke, her voice, cutting through the silence, clear and precise. "He didn't leave me the silverware, Richard." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "He left me everything." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's smirk froze, then melted from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed incomprehension. Victoria's eyes widened, the derisive laughter dying in her throat. "What? What did you just say?" Richard stammered. Mr. Finch chose that moment to intercede, his voice booming with official authority. The last will and testament of Reginald Blackwood is quite clear. He bequeaths his entire estate without condition or exception to his sole and only issue, his daughter. He turned his head and looked directly at Catherine. Miss Catherine Blackwood Prescott. He deliberately used her birth name, a name Richard had never even heard. The impact was seismic. Blackwood Richard choked out the word, his face turning pale. Your father was Reginald Blackwood. Yes, Catherine said simply. Victoria looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her perfectly made-up face contorted in a mask of disbelief and horror. The dots were connecting in her mind with terrifying speed. The wife she had dismissed as a frumpy nobody, the woman she was trying to kick out of a modest mansion in Greenwich, was the heir to one of the largest fortunes on the planet. That's not possible, Victoria whispered, shaking her head. You're lying. I assure you, Miss Vance, my firm does not deal in fabrications, Mr. Finch stated coldly. The documents are all here, certified, notarized, and utterly unbreakable. Catherine Sterling, or rather, Ms. Prescott, is now the chairperson and majority shareholder of Blackwood Industries and the owner of all its assets. All of them. He slid the deed he had shown Catherine the day before to the center of the desk, its title in full view. Deed of ownership. Property, Greyhaven Manor. Richard's eyes fell upon the document, and a strangled sound escaped his lips. The house, the crown jewel, the legacy he had been so desperately chasing. It belonged to her. It had always been hers to inherit. His entire obsession was a fool's errand, a desperate attempt to buy his way into a kingdom that was her birthright. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had not just cheated on his wife. He had betrayed, humiliated, and tried to discard a billionaire heiress. He had thrown away a winning lottery ticket in favor of a cheap counterfeit. The sheer magnitude of his stupidity, of his colossal life-altering miscalculation, was written in the dawning horror on his face. He looked from the deed to Catherine, and for the first time he saw her not as his quaint, docile wife, but as the most powerful person he had ever met. And he had just declared war on her. The drive out to Long Island was different this time. Catherine wasn't a passenger in Richard's ostentatious Mercedes, listening to him pontificate about market trends. She was in the back of a black, discreetly armored Bentley, provided by Mr. Finch, a silent bodyguard in the front seat. The world outside the tinted windows looked the same, but her relationship to it had been fundamentally altered. She was no longer observing it. She was a force that could act upon it. As they turned onto the long, winding private road leading to Greyhaven, a knot of familiar anxiety tightened in her stomach. This wasn't just a property. It was a mausoleum of memories. Summers spent exploring its dusty corridors, arguments with her father in the cavernous study, the ghost of her mother's laughter in the rose garden. She had fled this place to build a simpler life, and now she was returning as its queen, a role she never wanted, but would now have to embrace. Her quiet reflection was shattered as they rounded the final bend. There in front of the magnificent wrought-iron gates of Greyhaven was Richard's Mercedes, and parked behind it, a garish, bright yellow moving van. On the lawn, directing two burly movers who were struggling with a ridiculously ornate gold-leafed sofa, was Victoria Vance. She was dressed in white linen pants and a silk blouse, pointing and gesturing as if she were directing a military invasion. Richard was standing by the massive oak front doors, arguing with a locksmith who was in the process of drilling out the main lock. They were moving in. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it sent a surge of white-hot fury through Catherine. Even after the revelation in Finch's office, even after knowing who she was, they were still proceeding with their pathetic little coup, trying to establish squatters' rights in her ancestral home. "Stop the car," Catherine said, her voice dangerously calm. The bodyguard glanced in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, perhaps we should let security handle this." "No," she said, her eyes fixed on the scene. "I will handle this." She stepped out of the Bentley, the gravel crunching under her heels. The movers paused, staring. The locksmith stopped drilling. Richard and Victoria turned, and their jaws collectively dropped for the second time in 24 hours. "Catherine," Richard exclaimed, his voice a mixture of panic and bluster. "What in God's name are you doing here? This is a private property." "Indeed it is," Catherine said, walking towards him with a steady, unhurried pace. "It's my private property, and you are trespassing." Victoria, recovering her composure with a sneer, stepped forward. "Don't be ridiculous. Richard's lawyers are all over this. They found a loophole in the title, some old easement clause. We have every right to be here. This house has been abandoned for years. The only thing that has been abandoned, Victoria, is your grasp on reality," Catherine said coolly. She turned her attention to the flustered locksmith. "You can stop what you're doing. You're being paid to illegally break into my home. I suggest you pack up your tools and leave before I have you charged with breaking and entering." The man looked from Catherine's steely gaze to Richard's sputtering face and wisely began packing his toolkit. "You can't do this," Richard yelled, his desperation mounting. "I have millions tied up in this. I've made promises. My reputation is on the line." "Your reputation?" Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "Richard, you are the punchline to a joke you don't even understand yet. You tried to throw me out of my own house in Greenwich to move your mistress in. Now you are trying to break into my family's estate to do the same thing. The pattern is as pathetic as it is predictable." Just then, a second and third black car, identical to Catherine's, pulled up the driveway. Mr. Finch emerged from the first, holding a leather portfolio. Two uniformed police officers and a stern-looking man in a suit, the head of Greyhaven's long-standing security detail, emerged from the second. Victoria's face went pale. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Vance." Mr. Finch announced, his voice echoing across the manicured lawn. "The owner of this property, Ms. Catherine Prescott, has filed a formal complaint of trespassing against you." He opened the portfolio and produced the original deed, its paper thick with age and authority. "This is the deed to Greyhaven, held by the Blackwood family since 1898. Here he produced the second newer document, is the current title registered with the state of New York, showing sole, unencumbered ownership by Ms. Prescott. You have absolutely no legal or moral right to be here." The police officers stepped forward, their presence radiating calm, non-negotiable authority. "So, ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately." Richard's face was a mess of impotent rage. He was a man who was used to bullying his way to victory, to buying or suing his way out of any problem. But he was facing a wall of power he couldn't breach. He had no leverage, no angle, no recourse. Victoria, however, made one last desperate play. She turned to Catherine, her voice suddenly pleading saccharine. "Catherine, please, let's not be hasty. Richard and we made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But you and he had a life together. 10 years. Doesn't that count for anything? You can't just throw him out with nothing." It was a pathetic appeal to a shared history that she herself had gleefully tried to incinerate. Catherine looked at the woman who had just days ago told her to pack her bags and get out of her own home. She saw no remorse, only the frantic calculations of a cornered animal. "The 10 years we had Victoria are precisely why I am doing this." Catherine said, her voice as cold and hard as the stone of the manor behind her. Now get off my property, both of you." She turned to the movers who were still standing by their truck, gawking at the drama. "As for that," she pointed at the garish gold sofa, "put it back on the truck. If any of your belongings are left on my land in the next 10 minutes, I will consider it abandoned refuse and have it disposed of." Defeated, humiliated, and utterly routed, Richard and Victoria had no choice but to retreat. Under the watchful eyes of the police, they scurried back to Richard's Mercedes. The movers hastily reloaded the furniture. The entire pathetic invasion was over in minutes. As their car sped away down the driveway, kicking up dust and defeat, Mr. Finch handed Catherine a single ornate, heavy brass key. "Welcome home, Miss Prescott," he said. Catherine took the key. It felt warm in her hand, a conduit to the past and the future. She walked up the stone steps, inserted it into the lock the man had failed to drill, and turned. The heavy door swung open with a soft, sighing groan, releasing the scent of beeswax, old wood, and thyme. She stepped across the threshold, not as a visitor, not as a memory, but as the mistress of Greyhaven. The sunlight streamed in behind her, illuminating the dust motes, dancing in the grand hall. This wasn't just a house, it was her fortress. It was her inheritance. It was her throne. And she had just defended her kingdom. The downfall of Richard Sterling was not a sudden spectacular explosion, but a slow, systemic collapse, orchestrated with the precision of a controlled demolition. While Catherine was reacquainting herself with the echoing halls of Greyhaven, Mr. Finch and the formidable legal team of Blackwood Industries were quietly and efficiently dismantling her husband's life. The first blow was financial. News of the divorce, coupled with the revelation of Catherine's identity, spread through the insular world of New York finance like wildfire. Richard had built his company Sterling Properties on a mountain of debt leveraged against the illusion of his own success, and his wife's good name, even the modest Prescott name, carried a certain old-world cachet. Now the banks and investors who had once courted him saw him for what he was, a man who had monumentally fumbled a connection to one of the world's largest fortunes. He was no longer a savvy player. He was a fool. His lines of credit were frozen overnight. His primary backers, a powerful investment consortium, pulled their funding from his flagship skyscraper project, citing a crisis of confidence in leadership. The project, his monument to himself, stalled a half-finished steel skeleton against the skyline, a testament to his hubris. The calls he made to powerful friends went unreturned. He had been excommunicated from the club. Victoria Vance found her own social standing evaporated. The women who had once envied her now pitied and scorned her. She was no longer the clever siren who had ensnared a wealthy developer. She was the idiot who had attached herself to a sinking ship, the mistress who had tried to usurp a billionaire. Invitations dried up. Her calls to gossip columnists, hoping to spin the story, were met with cold indifference. Her 15 minutes of infamy were over. Without Richard's endless stream of money, her lavish lifestyle came to a screeching halt. The lease on her designer-furnished penthouse was terminated. Her black Amex was declined at Bergdorf's. Within a week, she and Richard were holed up in a suite at the Pierre Hotel that he could no longer afford, the walls closing in on them as their world shrank. The recriminations began bitter and vicious. "This is your fault," Richard snarled at her one evening, pacing the suite like a caged animal. "You were too aggressive. You had to go to the house. You had to force the issue. If you'd just waited, I could have handled it. I could have negotiated." "My fault!" Victoria shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "You're the one who was married to a secret billionaire for 10 years and was too stupid to realize it. You told me she was nobody. You told me she had nothing. I hitched my wagon to a star, and it turned out to be a flaming piece of garbage falling from the sky. They tore into each other. their great love revealed as nothing more than a shared business venture that had gone bankrupt. Meanwhile, at Greyhaven, Catherine was undergoing her own transformation. She spent the first few days simply walking the grounds, relearning the geography of her past. She found the hidden garden where her mother grew roses, and the dusty attic where she'd hidden as a child. The house was not a monument to her father's power, but a repository of a life she'd forgotten. But she did not dwell in the past. Under Mr. Finch's tutelage, she began a rapid, intensive education in the workings of her inheritance. Every morning, executives from Blackwood Industries would arrive at Greyhaven not as supplicants, but as teachers. They walked her through quarterly reports, global asset allocations, and philanthropic strategies. They discovered that the quiet, bookish woman had a mind like a steel trap. Her experience in architectural preservation had given her a meticulous eye for detail and a deep understanding of structural integrity, both in buildings and in business. She was a natural. Her father's instincts were her own. It was during a review of the real estate division's portfolio that she found the final key to Richard's ruin. She was examining a file on a series of shell corporations that Blackwood Industries had been monitoring for suspicious activity. The companies were buying up distressed commercial properties and flipping them at inflated prices using questionable appraisals. The lead company was a blandly named entity, Atlantic Trinity Holdings. The name meant nothing to her, but a subsidiary listed beneath it made her blood run cold. RS Development Group. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice tight, "I need you to look into this." The investigation was swift and damning. Richard, in his arrogance, had been trying to defraud her own father. For the past 2 years, he had been using these shell companies to purchase properties that Blackwood Industries was also targeting, artificially inflating their value through straw buyers, and then attempting to sell them to Blackwood's real estate division at a massive profit. He was using inside information, likely leaked from a low-level employee, to cheat the very empire his wife was destined to inherit. He had been trying to steal from her family right under her nose. It was more than just infidelity. It was a profound, calculated betrayal that targeted the core of her legacy. It was an act of corporate espionage that carried with it the potential for serious prison time. Mr. Finch presented the findings to her in the Greyhaven Library, the same room where her father had once planned his corporate conquests. The evidence was irrefutable: bank transfers, encrypted emails, forged documents. The district attorney's office would be very interested in this. Finch said, his tone grim. Wire fraud, conspiracy, insider trading. It would be a lengthy prison sentence. Catherine looked out the window at the churning grey waters of the Sound. She had the power to utterly destroy him, to see him stripped of his freedom, as well as his fortune. A part of her, the wounded, betrayed part, craved that biblical justice. But then she thought of the man so full of bluster and false confidence, reduced to a cowering inmate in a prison jumpsuit. She thought of the past 10 years. She had loved him once, or at least she had loved the man she thought he was. Obliterating him felt like a waste of her newfound energy. She was a builder, not a demolisher. "No," she said finally, turning back to Finch. "No prison." Finch raised an eyebrow. "I want to use this," she said, tapping the file. "Not as a sword, but as a shield. And as a lever." She laid out her plan. It was not merciful. It was in its own way far more cruel and fitting than a jail cell. She would not allow him the dignity of being a corporate martyr. She would ensure he was simply erased. The final meeting took place not in a courtroom or a lawyer's office, but in the sterile, neutral territory of a conference room at a downtown hotel. Catherine chose the venue specifically. It was a place of transience, of temporary arrangements, perfectly reflecting what Richard's life had become. He arrived alone. Victoria was gone, having decamped with what little jewelry she had left, vanishing back into the ether from which she had come. Richard looked haggard. His expensive suit hung on him. His face was gaunt, and the confident swagger had been replaced by the haunted shuffle of a defeated man. He looked 10 years older. Catherine was already seated at the head of the long table, flanked by Mr. Finch. She looked serene, powerful at home in her own skin. She was no longer the quiet wife. She was the CEO of Blackwood Industries. "Richard," she said, her tone neutral, devoid of anger or pity. "Thank you for coming. My lawyer said I had to," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. He slumped into a chair at the far end of the table. "We are here to finalize the terms of the divorce," Catherine began. Normally this would be a complex process of dividing assets. However, in our case, it's going to be quite simple. Mr. Finch slid a single piece of paper across the table towards Richard and his lawyer. It was a settlement agreement. "You will cede any and all claims to any property asset or account we shared during our marriage," Catherine stated. "This includes the Greenwich House, all art vehicles, and financial accounts. You will walk away with the clothes on your back, and nothing else." Richard's lawyer spluttered. "That's preposterous. Marital assets are to be divided equitably. Mr. Sterling funded their entire lifestyle for a decade. We will fight this in court for years." "No, you won't," Catherine said calmly. Mr. Finch then slid a second much thicker file across the table. It was the file on Atlantic Trinity Holdings. "We suggest you review this before you decide on your legal strategy," Finch said dryly. "It contains detailed evidence of a multi-year conspiracy to defraud Blackwood Industries, wire fraud specifically, a federal offense with a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. We have already prepared a copy for the U.S. Attorney's Office." Richard opened the file. As he read, the last vestiges of color drained from his face. He saw the emails, the bank records, the whole sordid scheme laid bare. He saw not just ruin, but a cage. "You did this," he whispered, finally looking at Catherine. His expression wasn't angry, but awed, terrified. He finally understood. He hadn't married a quiet mouse. He had married a dragon. "You did this to yourself, Richard," she replied. "This is the consequence of your choices. You have two options. You can sign the divorce settlement, agree to my terms, and this file remains in this room. You will be left with nothing but your freedom and your debts. Or you can refuse, and Mr. Finch will make a phone call as we leave. The choice is yours. There was no choice. It was checkmate." With a trembling hand, Richard Sterling signed away his marriage, his home, and the last decade of his life. He left the room a ghost, a man erased from the world of wealth and power he had so desperately coveted. Catherine didn't watch him go. She was already looking forward. In the months that followed, she came into her own. She proved to be a brilliant and innovative leader at Blackwood Industries, pivoting the company towards sustainable development and historical preservation projects, merging her father's business acumen with her own passions. She was respected not just for her name, but for her vision. She made Greyhaven her home. She didn't gut it as Victoria had planned. Instead, she restored it, honoring its history while infusing it with new life. She filled the silent halls with music, with friends like Naomi, and with the bustling energy of her new life. The library became her true office, the place where she managed her empire, surrounded by the books she loved. One cool autumn evening, she stood on the grand stone terrace overlooking the Long Island Sound, a place where she had once felt like a child trapped in her father's world. The wind was crisp. The sea was a dark, churning expanse of possibility. She was not Catherine Sterling, the developer's wife, nor was she just Catherine Prescott, the dutiful daughter. She was simply Catherine. She had been stripped of everything she thought defined her, only to discover that her foundation was not built on a marriage or a house, but on a strength she never knew she possessed. The mansion was hers, the fortune was hers, but the victory, she realized, was in reclaiming herself. This story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the deepest reserves of strength. Catherine's journey wasn't just about inheriting a fortune. It was about inheriting her own power and rewriting a narrative that others had tried to impose on her. She turned betrayal into a catalyst for transformation, proving that a person's true worth is never defined by their partner, but by their own character and resilience. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate revenge? Was it more satisfying than seeing Richard behind bars? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible story of justice and empowerment, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that will leave you breathless. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update.